We are going to begin on our 10-minute painting at the bottom of our horizon with a large square-headed brush and a mixture of titanium white and primary yellow. We're applying our pigment at the bottom and blending it upwards very slowly. I'm predominantly doing this in a horizontal motion. Then I'm taking that same pigment and doing the exact same thing below in the reflection, because the water is going to reflect the colors and the same gradients as the sky, and it's easy to do both at the same time. Then I'm going to take an orange, which is simply a mixture of primary red and primary yellow, and apply that atop our initial application and blend it down softly. You want to render a very natural transition from one to another. This is best achieved when the pigment is still wet, but if you find that it's kind of drying and you're getting a toothy aesthetic, you can incorporate more water into your mixture, and this should really help aid the entire process. So from there, I'm taking that same orange that I used in the sky and implementing it down into my water. However, I'm using the sharper edge of the square-headed brush rather than the flat side, and in horizontal strokes, I'm kind of separating the pigments to ensure that there's a little bit of a movement within the water. Then at the top left-hand corner of our painting, I'm grabbing a more red dominant orange and I'm blending that in as well. The goal here is to ensure that the top left and the bottom left-hand corners of the painting are very orange. They're a darker pigment, a little bit more red, and as you move towards the center right, you get this really nice yellow and this brilliant consuming white light. So from there, I'm going to take my medium-sized square-headed brush and begin on my mountains. Now, these mountains are going to be adopting the same colors as the sky for the most part, because the sky is going to reflect upon them and the light is going to consume them to a point and blend with them. So here we're using an orange, however it has a little bit more red in it and it has a little bit of burnt umber in it as well. I'm blending it down into the water to ensure that we have a nice smooth transition from one to the other. And then I'm going back to my palette and grabbing a little bit of black and a little bit more of my burnt umber and applying the darker side of the mountain. It's important to note that the light is only going to be hitting a single side of the mountain and that the other will need these darker pigments. It'll make it look much more real, it'll make it look much more three-dimensional by having both a light and a dark side. That's generally how you want to implement depth. You have a bright pigment, you have maybe a medium colored pigment, and then you have a darker pigment. With that being said, for the majority of these strokes, I'm applying them in the same angle and direction as the side of the mountain, as the edge. So whatever degree that angle is, I'm essentially implementing that throughout the majority of my strokes, and this is just going to create a litany of paths and additional interest within our mountain for the most part. You can do this with both lighter and darker pigments. Isn't it strange when I stop talking? I never do, but I don't know. It just happened. Anyways, getting back to it, now I'm using an old square-headed brush, and in a tapping motion, I'm creating the implication of trees in the distance. So as you can see, these trees are different, these clusters are different. As I make the tap, I kind of rotate my brush in the air and then make another tapping motion, and this just ensures that the clusters are all a little bit different. I'm also implementing the same effect and technique down into the reflection in the water as well. We'll separate them a little bit later on once the pigments have dried. However, in the meantime, I'm just going to take a small little circular brush and create some pine trees. Just add a little bit of detail and diversity into the foliage. It'll make it a lot more interesting, and it'll actually do so much more for the painting. Then I'm going to take that old square-headed brush with the bristles that kind of leaf off in varying directions, and yet again in a tapping motion, I'm going to create the implication of leaves on our tree. Now, because there are so many leaves and because the tree is a little bit farther away, implication is really all you need. You don't have to draw in every single leaf. the tapping effect, the bristle, the mark that it creates really is enough to kind of show the eye what it thinks it wants. So with that being said, as I run out of pigment, I'm kind of working down at the bottom of my tree. It's going to be less stark, it's going to blend more with the background, and it'll make the leaves look like they're a little bit farther away, which is great for the implication of depth, as you can see. If you want it to be very stark and in the foreground, make it very dense and black. If you want it to be a little bit farther away, ensure that the paint's running out on the brush. With that said, now I'm creating my branches and some of the actual tree here with a small square-headed brush, a lot of water, and a pure black pigment. This is in the foreground, and so this is where we want to use our black pigment to really drive home the depth. I'm ensuring that my branches aren't ever the same. I want them to be a little bit wobbly. I want them to have their own little unique pieces to them. And I want there to be enough branches so that the painting looks interesting. As your branches move upwards, they should get smaller and smaller. Now we're going to do something that we haven't done on the channel in a long time, and that is use a rake brush. And if you Google a rake brush, you'll see that it essentially has a litany of little pieces that shoot up, and there are holes essentially in it. And what this does is it ensures that when you make a single stroke with the brush, you actually make 3 or 4 on the canvas. So it saves a lot of time when creating things like fur, feathers, or in this case, grass. To ensure that all of these are sharp, I'm using a lot of water in my mixture with the black. It'll really aid the process. However, as you can see, it'll really thin the paint. So you'll need to go back over certain portions with a thicker black, just to ensure that you get something that looks very natural and in the foreground. Here I'm using a large square-headed brush, and I'm just completing the bottom portion because there isn't any detail work in the grass, and it's essentially just this matte black portion of the painting, which is fairly easy to fix. Now, I'm being fairly delicate. I'm trying not to disrupt the grass that we just rendered on the top, but you can also add additional pieces with a square-headed brush because it does have that sharp, fine, pointed tip, and the brush is actually great for rendering things such as that, provided it is small enough. Then I'm going to take a little bit of orange and reapply that to the top left-hand corner of the painting. As you can see, I missed a little spot. It's okay, we still have our pigment on our palette. It's easy to grab from or remake if necessary. Then I'm going to take my titanium white paint. Maybe it has a mixture of our primary yellow or our orange, but we're essentially creating a division between both our mountains and our water. Then, using my pinky finger, I'm kind of just lightly going over it, kind of fading out that line so it isn't too stark. You want to ensure that the foreground is really where you have a lot of the detail and a lot of the sharp edges. As things move into the background, they should get a little bit more blurry. Then I'm taking those same pigments and I'm creating that division through the middle ground of our painting here. And as you can see, through horizontal strokes in our water with these lighter colors, we really render the implication of movement. So I'm going back to my palette, I'm grabbing more of a pure white, I'm getting a bit of water to dampen it to ensure that it isn't a toothy effect when we apply it. Now, I moved the canvas and I let it dry to show you what the painting looks like without a wet black aesthetic, because that can be fairly deceiving, and I wanted to show you that it looks a lot better once you wait. And I also wanted to show you down here at the bottom that you can use that same tapping effect in the grass to combine the two and create something really interesting. But really, there we have it. That is our 10-minute painting for this week. We used a lot of different techniques, and it's great. It's a great painting for beginners to try out different brushes and some really fun things. With that being said, if you are a beginner, if you are new to acrylic painting and you would like to learn more, there is a link in the description to my ebook. It'll really get you started. And of course, I post every Saturday. I hope to see you next Saturday. Thank you so much for watching, and above all, stay creative.